Hi, I'm Sherry Frazier, and I'm with Real Estate by Sherry and Keller Williams Greater Lexington. I've been a real estate agent for coming 20 years now, and I've seen a lot of things happen throughout the process, and a lot of shifts in the market, and things that are experienced today sometimes is different tomorrow. So there's been a lot of situations that I've been in where I've gained knowledge by experience, and I'm hoping to talk to Shawn here. He's with United Financial Group, mortgage originator, and he's also a retired military and a father. And I'm very happy to have Shawn come on here to help me answer some questions that you may not know that you need to ask. And Shawn's got a lot of experience too and very knowledgeable. And I'm happy to have him as a resource for my clients to kind of help them navigate the process of divorce and save their credit score and their credit status. There's lots of things that come into a situation, and sometimes it's a little bit late by the time you realize that it needed to be dealt with from the beginning. So hopefully we can give you some answers to questions or just give you some information of what to look out for and prevent you from making some bad decisions. So Shawn, I'm going to let you kind of introduce yourself, and then you can start telling some of the situations that you know can happen, and just explain what questions they need to be asking and when they need to ask them.
Awesome. Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to sharing, the things that I run into and that are most common almost on a weekly basis, dealing with folks that have gone through a divorce and how it impacts their ability to buy a home or sell a home or even be qualified. So one of the biggest things that I run into right off the bat is I pull credit, and I always have to go through all the liabilities. And one of the first things they tell me is like, oh, my ex is responsible for that. Mm-hmm. It's still on the credit. And they say, well, I thought that was already taken care of, or I thought it didn't matter anymore. And the issue is that people don't think about how they entered into financial obligations jointly, and that a judge's decree does not supersede a previous financial obligation. So although the judge may say that one of spouse or the other is responsible for that debt, it doesn't change or supersede the contract that the couple went into together. So the only way that can be actually addressed is if they refinance or pay off a debt or do some type of financial process to separate those two. So when you're actually going through a divorce, it's critical to understand how you're jointly linked financially, not just through everything else, through the family and who gets the kids and what happens with that. But it's also about financial, and that a lot of people may think about the house, who gets the house, but that's one of the biggest things that I see is we'll end up going through there and there's a mortgage on there and say, yeah, went through divorce and my ex-wife gets the house. Still on your report because nobody actually figured out if the spouse could refinance the home into them if they actually qualified. So if they don't go through that process up front, they could go through an entire divorce, have the judge sign off on everything that's supposed to happen, and have absolutely no ability to execute the judge's orders. Because the judge isn't looking at it from a legal or from a financial perspective. They're just signing off on whatever's been decided and saying, yea, verily, this is I sign off on these decisions. But that has absolutely nothing
in other words, if the judge says this is what's going to happen, that doesn't mean it actually does happen.
Or and can happen.
Yeah. And who's going to enforce? What do you do in the situation where they don't follow the judge's orders? Mm-hmm. Or, they can't qualify to refinance.
Right. And that happens a lot where either they were supposed to, but they can't. Now, there are a couple items like if the spouse is responsible for making the payments and they have done so, then if they've done it for 12 months, and normally we can show a divorce decree and say that they're responsible for it, and then show it coming out of the ex, and this is dealing with the ex. What is the relationship with the ex? Because if it's not a good relationship, it gets a little bit hairy, because now you're pulling in an ex into a new financial transaction, and you got to see all of their financial stuff in order to prove that they're making the monthly payments, because you're dealing with a lender who's talking about risk, right? And that risk is looking at this mortgage statement and going, how is that going to be paid? Because if the ex doesn't pay it, it's still on their credit. They're still financially responsible for it, financially obligated for it. So that's what they're looking for. Now, what I see a lot of times is you go through the divorce, and then the other spouse who was supposed to take over the payments, if they don't make the payments, that negatively impacts the other spouse's credit, because it's still joint. So anything that they have that are joint that the other spouse doesn't take care of that they were supposed to, still negatively impacts their credit. So that's when you're going through a divorce. You don't want to, you want a divorce to be final. You don't want to, be linked financially, after that is done. So that's why it's a big recommendation that if you are about ready to go through a divorce, you need to link up with a loan officer, especially if if there's property involved, so that they can get the credit pulled in and see what joint financial obligations are there, and what are you capable of doing with the house. So a good example, let's say you had a $400,000 house, and then they're splitting, and then they decide that one spouse is going to keep the home, but they may or may not have the income to make the payments. Well, in order to get it fully in that spouse's name, you have to refinance. So if you go to refinance, and then I'm running that, and I say, well, you don't actually qualify for a mortgage on a $400,000 house. You can't afford the payment. So we cannot refinance it into your name. And that's oftentimes they find this out after the divorce is complete. So now you have this house that the spouse has the legal ownership of, if you will, according to the divorce decree. But from a financial standpoint, it's still there. It's still joint, because they can't get it out of the other spouse's name. They don't qualify. So
that's if they're both on the mortgage, or
if they're both on the mortgage, yep.
Okay. So
correct.
Let's say they're not both on the mortgage, but the one that is keeping the house is not on the mortgage. The other person is, and they do what we call quit claim, which that's, releasing their right to the property by deed. That doesn't release them from that financial responsibility of the mortgage if they're on the mortgage.
Right. That's right. So Kentucky's a dowry state. And what that means is that when you go to closing, both spouses have to be on the deed or title, so that it's ownership. So what I tell people is the financing is, or the loan is the financing, and the deed or title is the ownership. So in Kentucky, you have 50-50 ownership, but only one spouse may be obligated financially. So I have also seen it where they actually did execute a quitclaim deed. So the spouse had the physical ownership of the house, and the other spouse still had the financial obligation, and they couldn't get rid of it because the spouse who now has the ownership didn't have the financial ability to take over the mortgage. So it was a bit of a mess. And then once the divorce is finalized, again, depending on, if it was not an amicable divorce, that can be pretty painful.
Right.
So the way that really should happen is if they did all that up front at the beginning consultation, when they're thinking about going through a divorce and finding out, okay, hey, what can we do? You might find out that you can't afford a $400,000 house, but you can afford a $250,000 house. So what that would happen is they would know so it becomes emotional, right? So we all know that divorces are emotional, but a house is emotional on top of that, because what if they had spent years and years and years, in that house and raising children? Well, to find out that neither spouse can afford it, or the spouse that they agreed is going to get it can't afford it and can't refinance it, you're going to have to sell that home. So it's better to know that up front. So they could sell the home, get any equity that's out of it, and perhaps then go purchase a $250,000 home.
Right.
So that now they have a home of their own, but you can't do that afterwards because it's become so messy if you don't know the answer, and you can get the answers up front. The other thing about that too is you could actually begin the refinance process. So let's say that you're going through the divorce, and once that they agree, okay, hey, you're going to get the house, well, they can begin that refinance process right there. And then they could close on that refinance so that the financial obligation is in the other spouse's name alone. And then at closing, dowry estate will both still be on there. But in the divorce agreement, you could say upon the final settlement of the divorce, they will also sign a quit claim deed, putting the full ownership into the spouse that financed it. And that way it's all wrapped up, done. And when you're divorced, everything is separated.
It will come back to haunt you. So
Right.
who would be the right people to talk to before you made those decisions and signed the settlement?
Sure. So you're going to go to a lawyer when you guys are talking about it, and they're going to actually put together a case file, if you will. Once that happens and you begin to start talking about property and who's going to get what, that's when you need to start talking to a lender, to a loan officer, to figure out what can each spouse actually do financially. Because you don't want to find that out after the proceedings, because as I started out, a judge's decree does not supersede the financial obligation. You want to know the answers up front, because if you can't do it, then you know you got to sell. If you can do it, then you want to make sure it happens while you still have the divorce proceedings going on. Because as I also mentioned, how many times have we gone through, well, the judge said they're supposed to, but they just haven't. Right. The other thing that I see all the time is people will use credit as a weapon. Right? They don't make the payments, they will mess up each other's credit. Right. And my biggest recommendation is don't do that, because if you do that, because some people get, some divorces are bad and messy, but if you do that, then the long-lasting repercussions of using credit as a weapon impacts both parties for up to 7 to 10 years.
Right.
Right. So then again, you may be divorced, but that is lingering with you forever. You don't want that. You want a clean break. And that's why also seeing a lender, they're going to pull your credit in and they're going to see all your financial obligations. Like if there's a joint credit card, you need to get another credit card and either transfer that stuff or pay it off so that this is separated, and then close it. That way another spouse can't use the credit.
Yeah, I've seen that happen too. And so, my thoughts along that same line are, if you have a house and you're thinking about you need to refinance it, that, it's wise to talk to a real estate agent and get a
100%
good market analysis because I know people that go on Zillow and they say, well, Zillow says my house is worth this. And, and it may or may not be, it may be worth a whole lot more. So there's a lot of equity that, you may be leaving on the table that you don't figure into the property settlement. There is usually an appraisal that is required to be done at some point in there, but it'd be really nice to know prior to that.
So that brings up something really important too. I'm glad you brought that up. Is if I am looking at doing a refinance and the real estate agent is there, I'm going to come right to the real estate agent and say, hey, can you take a look at this property? What do you think that? Because the real estate agent is the critical piece to any type of transaction there. So what do you think this house will sell for? And what do you recommend, and what areas? And I mean, there's so much that goes into that. I'm sorry. If you can talk a little bit more about that, that'd be awesome.
Well, typically what I do is, when somebody calls me or contacts me to do a market analysis for whatever reason, then I'm going to go visit the house. I'm not just going to, just talk to them over the phone and look it up online, because I've found many times over that the information that you can get online is not necessarily updated. And if they've finished a basement, or they've added a room addition and there's more square footage than what is shown online, then right now there's a lot of equity there. Right. And they need to know what their true value would be on the market. So I'm just going to go visit the property. There may be some deferred maintenance, and a lot of times there are, especially when you've been through that divorce process for sometimes years and things didn't get done because you couldn't afford to do it, or you just you couldn't agree to things, and so those are left undone, and so that's going to affect your value as well, and it's definitely the marketability of it. But what you're really concerned about is how close can I get to what my true market value is without paying for it. That's the other thing. You pay for an appraisal, but market analysis that I do, I don't charge for them. It's more of a, a courtesy, a service that I provide. And the other thing that I found too is family law attorneys, your divorce attorney, and even the judge, they don't know a lot about real estate and values for sure, and those kind of things, and they don't know anything about the mortgage process. So they're going to give you advice based on information that is provided to them, how you need to structure your settlement, and they have these formulas that they use and everything. Ultimately, it's still your decision, but you need to have really good information, available to you to make those wise decisions. Because I know personally, and I know lots of people, when you're in that emotional state, you make decisions that are going to affect you for years and years and years, and it may have been the worst decision you could have made. Like keeping the house, that might not have been the best decision for you, but you did it on an emotional thing, and the other party is going to be making decisions and trying to bully you or encourage you, coerce you into making decisions that benefit them in the present and long term. And you've done that because you wanted to keep the peace. You didn't want to fight with your ex because there's kids involved, or you just didn't want to, or you wanted them to be happy with you and you didn't want to make them any matter. But the truth is, if you have good information and you're not taking what they say or what somebody else in your family is advising that you should do, then you're going to be able to make more solid decisions, and your attorney should be able to give you better advice based on those facts. So I would really encourage you to contact a real estate agent. When you're starting in the process, when you're talking to your financial advisor, or even, as soon as you talk to your attorney, you need to start that process too, and just don't settle for what somebody else tells you.
Yeah, absolutely. And because it is an emotional time and there's a lot going on, I know that real estate agent is going to become a trusted advisor. And would you say that as a real estate agent, you're somebody that somebody going through that process, that there's a lot of emotions, a lot of turmoil, that's somebody that they can come to you to be able to say, hey, I need help to find this? And because I see it all the time where people will go online, like you're talking about, and they'll bounce around to different properties. But can you talk about how important it is as a buyer's agent to represent that buyer as well as if you were the selling agent selling the house?
Yeah, because so if I'm representing the buyer, and the buyer is just as apt to do this, is go and look at the property online and say, oh, well, that house is worth $200,000, when reality, because I have been in the house and I've vetted it, it's actually only worth 175 because of certain things. And so I would be looking out for the buyer, and also the condition of the property. There's just lots of things that you have to take into consideration. But when you're at the buying side of it, you're usually not starting in the process of the divorce. That comes a little later after you've figured all this other stuff out. But as an agent on the other side, whenever I have a buyer that's buying a house from a divorcing couple, there's little things that we have to be careful about, because one person may agree to sell and want to sell, and they've signed the listing contract. When we get to making an offer and the offer gets accepted, it has to be accepted by both parties, both of the sellers. So anybody that's on the title, regardless of whether they're financially obligated, they have to agree to sell. And I've run into that many times where they just didn't want to. And so you're, heart set on this house that you're trying to buy, and they can't sell it because of whatever reason. And I mean, sometimes that doesn't come out until you're well into your process of applying for a loan. So yeah, it affects both those. And I'm certified in divorce as well, like you are. I'm a real estate divorce professional, and so in my training, there's a lot of stuff that I've gathered from other professionals, and because we go through training, and we get to talk to we get to talk to attorneys, and we get to talk to judges, and we get to talk to loan officers and financial planners and real estate agents. And so there's we're all trying to gather knowledge so we can represent our clients much better. But you may have an agent that you're using, maybe one of your family members, and they don't know what to look out for. So, you're kind of getting stuck in a situation that might not turn out so good because there just wasn't enough knowledge there. And it's not saying anything good or bad. I'm just saying that you just need to be careful when you're involved in any kind of situation like this, not even just divorce, but when there is an estate and there's heirs involved, and you've got 5 or 6 different people and their spouses that they have to agree to sell as well. And that can go all the way down to the day of closing before it gets settled. And
yeah,
if you know what to kind of look out for, and you got an agent that's experienced and a financial advisor or a loan officer that can say, hey, we need to clear this, we need to do a title search. That's the biggest thing, is the title search needs to be done, at the very beginning, so you don't run into those things.
Yeah, there's scenarios where a title search pulls up a lien that the other spouse didn't even know was on the house.
Yes.
All kinds of stuff comes out.
That happens all the time, and it has to be cleared. And so you could get into another 30 days or 60 days to get that done, so.
And that's also another really good point, because if you're doing, we think that we're, the house is worth this much and they're going to get this much equity, and then they find out that into that property settlement. So then they find out in the process that there's this lien and that they're not going to get what they thought that they were going to get. Or if you waited until after the divorce was complete before you do that, it's already settled. So whatever's left over, you're not getting what you thought that you were getting out of the house because of that lien. And that's a big problem.
Yeah, that's right. There's so many things that we could talk about, and we'll probably have to do this again, because as we're talking, things keep popping into my mind that I've been through, and my thoughts. But I think this has been good to start, some conversation and people thinking about, where do I start? And if I'm, I don't think you necessarily have to do anything if you're just thinking about filing for a divorce, but once it gets really serious and you're talking to an attorney, it's probably about the time you need to gather your army around, or your, just Absolutely. To have, just for the knowledge. It's not, we're not trying to give you any advice as far as divorce or anything like that. And one of the problems is, and I've did this myself, and I know a lot of people do, when you go and talk to an attorney, you're like, they're going to be able to give me advice on everything. They're going to know everything I need to know. That's definitely not the case. And even the judges that are making decisions for your life does not understand that. And nothing good or bad. It's just, that's not their profession. That's why we're not saying, we're not attorneys. We're not going to give you any kind of advice other than what we specialize in. And that's me being in real estate, and Shawn is a lender. So anything else you want to add there, Shawn?
We began talking a little bit about a quit claim deed. Maybe if we just talk, if you want to go into a quit claim deed, and then we'll wrap it up. And I think there was a good first.
Right. So when you buy property, let's take it for instance. Say you married somebody that owned a house, and they never put you on the deed, because it is a dowry state in Kentucky. You actually have ownership in that property, and you would have to sign what's called a quit claim deed, which says I give up any claim to ownership of this property. And then that quit claim deed has to be filed as in whatever the courthouse, I guess. It has to be an actual document that's certified and filed, so that it comes up whenever there's a chain of title that's looked for. So one case that I had, they were already divorced. They were selling the house to my buyer, and we got down to the day of closing, and we were told there was a quit claim deed done, but they couldn't find it. The title company that did the search could not find it in the courthouse filed. Well, we found out at the 11th hour that the attorney that handled it did not ever file it, and because they don't go and do it themselves. They hire a clerk to do it, and sometimes the clerk files it, but it gets lost somewhere and it never gets into the records. So we had to ask the seller's ex-wife to leave her job and come 2 counties over to go to the closing and sign that deed. So yeah, it gets interesting.
Yes, it does. All right. Well, awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I hope we can do this again. I just think that we share some really good information. You have a YouTube channel, don't you?
Yes,
Tell us about that?
Sure. So you can find me at Shawn C. Neely or the Mortgage Musketeer. So it's got a
Mortgage
lot of the
Musketeer.
Mortgage Musketeer.
Yeah.
So it's got a lot of information on there to learn just about home buying process, and it's good. Realtors have a lot of a lot of information. I really built it for both buyers and realtors just to share the information, so that everybody can better understand the lending process, because there's so much that seems like a mystery. But it's just guidelines, so I just break it down into different topics.
Yeah, and I've watched some of your videos, and they're really good and lots of good information. I have a YouTube channel too, and I'm kind of trying to build it better and put more of this type of information out there, because it's just, we just don't think about it until we are in that experience, and just trying to prevent you from making some bad mistakes. But so Shawn, how would they get in touch with you if they were interested in talking about a loan?
Yeah, so they can email me at Shawn, SHAWN, at ufglending.com. That's UFG for United Financial Group. So Shawn at ufglending.com, or reach out to me from the YouTube channel, or you can reach me at I have a cell phone from South Carolina from 25 years ago. It's 803-476-6733. And how about you? Can you tell them how to find your
I'm
YouTube
easy to
channel
find.
and how to contact
you just have to Google Shari Frazier. That's SHARIFRASURE, or you can find me at Real Estate by Shari or Keller Williams Greater Lexington. My phone number is 859-229-5945. That's my personal cell, and I do answer it. If I don't, just leave me a message. I'll call you back. I have several email addresses, but you just spell it SHARI at realestatebyshari.com, and it'll get right to me. So I really appreciate you watching this video, and we would love it if you would like it, if you could share it, turn on the notifications. We're going to upload this to YouTube and Facebook. And anytime you have any questions, just reach out. Thanks for watching. Thank you, Shawn.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thank you.